The most lethal American submarine of World War II met her end not from the enemy, but from her own weapon, a malfunctioning torpedo that completed a fatal arc in just 20 seconds. USS Tang sank 33 ships totaling 116,454 tons in only 9 months of combat before her 24th torpedo curved back and struck her stern on October 25, 1944. Of 87 men aboard, just 9 survived, including her legendary commander Richard O'Kane, who would receive the Medal of Honor and endure 10 months as a brutalized POW. Tang's story encompasses the pinnacle of American submarine warfare and its most tragic irony: the best became a victim of the weapon she wielded so effectively. USS Tang was built at Maury Island Navy Yard in Vallejo, California, with her keel laid on January 15, 1943. She was launched on August 17, 1943, sponsored by Mrs. Olisem Peter, and commissioned on October 15, 1943. The same month, her future commander's beloved former boat, USS Wahoo, was lost with all hands in the La Perouse Strait. Tang was a Balao-class fleet submarine, an improvement over the earlier Gatto class with a thicker pressure hull, 7/8-inch high-tensile steel versus 9/16-inch, allowing a test depth of 400 feet versus 300 feet for Gattos. Her specifications reflected the apex of American submarine design. She measured 311 feet 6 inches in length, with a beam of 27 feet 2 inches. Her displacement was 1,525 tons surfaced and 2,424 tons submerged. 4 Fairbanks-Morse 9-cylinder diesel engines drove electrical generators, which powered 4 Elliott Company electric motors. This arrangement gave her a speed of 20.25 knots surfaced and 8.75 knots submerged. Her armament consisted of 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft, with 24 torpedoes. She also carried 1 5-inch 25 caliber deck gun, 1 40mm Bofors, and 2 20mm Oerlikon cannons. Her standard crew was 66, though 87 men would be aboard on her final patrol. She had a range of 11,000 nautical miles at 10 knots. Her battle flag depicted a black panther ripping through the Japanese rising sun, a symbol that proved prophetic of the havoc she would wreak. Richard Hetherington O'Kane was born February 2, 1911 in Dover, New Hampshire, the youngest of 4 children. His father, Dr. Walter Collins O'Kane, was an entomology professor at the University of New Hampshire. Young Dick graduated from Phillips Academy, Andover in 1930 and entered the Naval Academy, graduating on May 31, 1934. After early assignments on the cruiser USS Chester and destroyer USS Pruitt, O'Kane completed submarine school in 1938 and served aboard the submarine USS Argonaut. His defining experience came aboard USS Wahoo SS-238 under Lieutenant Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton, the legendary and aggressive skipper who transformed submarine warfare tactics. Morton established an unconventional arrangement. He allowed O'Kane to man the periscope during attacks while Morton ran the approach plot, a reversal of standard practice that gave O'Kane invaluable combat experience. As Lieutenant George Grider explained, this left the skipper in a better position to interpret all factors involved, do a better conning job, and make decisions more dispassionately. The Morton-O'Kane partnership produced extraordinary results. Wahoo sank 20 ships for 60,038 tons during her career. O'Kane earned 3 Silver Stars as Wahoo's executive officer and absorbed Morton's aggressive philosophy. The submarine was meant to be a purely offensive vessel. When O'Kane departed in July 1943 to command the newly built Tang, he carried Morton's tactical innovations with him. 4 days before Tang's commissioning, Wahoo was lost with all 79 hands, a loss that haunted O'Kane and drove him to even greater success. Tang departed Pearl Harbor on January 22, 1944, for her first patrol to the Caroline Islands, operating west of Truk and Saipan. O'Kane demonstrated the aggressive, close-range tactics that would define his command. On February 17th, he sank the cargo ship Gyoten Maru at 6,854 tons in a submerged attack. On the night of February 22nd to 23rd, a surface attack destroyed auxiliary gunboat Fukuyama Maru at 3,581 tons. All 4 torpedoes hit. On February 23rd, Tang sank repair ship Yamashimo Maru at 6,777 tons, though the explosion damaged Tang herself. On February 24th to 25th, she sank Echizen Maru at 2,424 tons and Chokomaru at 1,794 tons. On one attack, Tang fired at 500 yards, point-blank range. The subsequent depth charging forced her down to 612 feet, exceeding her depth gauge maximum and testing the Belau-class hull to its limits. In total, she sank 5 ships for approximately 21,430 tons with a hit rate of 67%, 16 of 24 torpedoes. Tang's second patrol from March 16th to May 15th, 1944, saw no enemy ships sunk, but Tang achieved something equally remarkable during carrier airstrikes on Truk. On April 30th to May 1st, 1944, Tang rescued 22 downed aviators, a submarine rescue record. One OS-2U Kingfisher floatplane from USS North Carolina landed in Truk Lagoon with 9 airmen but couldn't take off, so it taxied out to Tang. O'Kane cut rations in half to feed the rescued pilots during the 3,000-mile journey to Pearl Harbor. Tang received her first Presidential Unit citation. Tang's third patrol from June 8th to July 14th, 1944 in the East China Sea and Yellow Sea produced the most successful single patrol by any American submarine of the war. On June 24th, in one devastating night surface attack southwest of Nagasaki, Tang sank 4 ships in a single engagement. Tamahoko Maru at 6,780 tons, Kenichi Maru at 1,938 tons, Nasusan Maru at 4,399 tons, and Tainan Maru at 3,450 tons, a single-day record of 16,292 tons. On June 30th, she torpedoed transport Nikken Maru at 5,587 tons off Korea. The ship was carrying Japanese troops and over 3,200 soldiers perished. On July 1st, she sank tanker Takatori Maru No. 1 at 909 tons and cargo ship Tayun Maru No. 2 at 1,044 tons. On July 4th, she sank Asukazan Maru at 6,886 tons in shallow coastal water where Tang's keel nearly touched bottom, then destroyed Yamaoka Maru at 6,932 tons. On July 5th to 6th, with her last 2 torpedoes, she sank Dori Maru at 1,409 tons off Darren. In total, she sank 10 ships for 39,160 tons, shattering all previous records. Tang's fourth patrol from July 31st to September 3rd, 1944, took her into the waters off the southern coast of Honshu, Japan's most heavily defended waters. On August 11th, she sank Roko Maru at 3,328 tons and withstood a 38-minute depth charge attack. On August 14th, she destroyed a patrol yacht with deck gun fire, 88 rounds with 8 hits, conserving her torpedoes. On August 22nd to 23rd, she sank an auxiliary patrol vessel and transport Tsukushi Maru at 1,859 tons. On August 25th, she sank tanker Nanko Maru No. 8 at 834 tons. She sank at least 5 ships on this patrol. Tang received her second Presidential Unit citation, one of only 2 submarines so honored. Tang departed Pearl Harbor on September 24, 1944 for her 5th patrol, topped off fuel at Midway on September 27th, and reached her patrol area on October 10th. Her assignment was the Formosa Strait, the 110-mile-wide passage connecting the South China Sea to the East China Sea. The strait was strategically critical, the lifeline for Japanese shipping carrying oil from the Dutch East Indies and reinforcements for the Philippines defense. Average depth was only 50 to 60 meters or 165 to 200 feet, making submarine operations particularly dangerous. There was little room to escape depth charges, but it was also difficult for submarines to hide. The October northeastern monsoon created complex currents and reduced visibility. The timing was crucial. General Douglas MacArthur landed at Leyte on October 20th, fulfilling his "I shall return" promise. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, October 23rd to 26th, 1944, the largest naval battle in history, was about to begin. Japanese convoys were desperately moving reinforcements through the Formosa Strait to support the Philippines' defense. Tang would position herself directly in their path. O'Kane chose to operate alone rather than join a wolf pack with Silversides, Trigger, and Salmon. In the shallow, heavily patrolled strait, he preferred independence. Tang's final patrol began productively. On October 11th, she sank cargo ships Jashugo and Oitamaru in separate attacks. Then came a frustrating period from October 12th to 22nd with no successful engagements despite multiple contacts. Shortly after midnight on October 22nd, Tang's radar detected a heavily escorted convoy, 3 large tankers, cargo ships, and multiple escorts. O'Kane executed a spectacular close-range night surface attack, penetrating the convoy when an escort left formation. The Japanese transport Wakatake Maru at 1,920 tons attempted to ram Tang. O'Kane ordered all-ahead emergency, right full rudder, and avoided collision with yards to spare. Japanese sailors opened fire with rifles and pistols at Tang's exposed bridge crew. An out-of-control freighter then collided with Wakatake Maru with a rending, groaning crash of tortured and distorted steel. Both ships disappeared in a fireball. In less than 10 minutes, Tang sank Tatsuju Maru at 1,944 tons, and Wakatake Maru damaged a third ship and left the convoy escorts firing at each other in confused panic. The following evening of October 24th, Tang detected another massive convoy hugging the China coast near Turnabout Island, or Kyushan Tao, at least 14 heavily loaded ships with over 12 destroyer escorts carrying aircraft and troops for Leyte. Despite being detected and coming under fire from escorts, O'Kane pressed the attack. Firing methodically at 900 to 1,400 yards, Tang sank tanker Matsumoto Maru at 7,024 tons, tanker Ebara Maru at 6,957 tons, loaded with gasoline and producing a massive fireball, and freighter Kogen Maru at 6,600 tons. She also sank at least one destroyer caught in crossfire or hit by a stray torpedo. By 0200 on October 25th, Tang had fired 22 torpedoes with devastating effect. Only 2 remained, and one damaged transport still floated, low in the water but stubbornly alive. After clearing the immediate area, O'Kane halted Tang at 10,000 yards to prepare for a final attack. For approximately 1 hour, the crew performed meticulous maintenance on the last 2 torpedoes. Partial withdrawal from tubes, battery ventilation, gyroscope inspection, and observation that steering mechanisms operated freely. Both torpedoes were then loaded into forward tubes number 3 and number 4. The decision was made to return and finish the crippled transport. Tang approached slowly, approximately 6 knots, to avoid sonar detection. At 2:30, the 23rd torpedo was fired at 900 yards. It ran hot, straight, and normal toward the target. Immediately, the 24th torpedo, a Mark 18 mod it is, 1 electric torpedo, left tube number 4. Chief Bosun's mate Bill Liebold, scanning with binoculars on the bridge, saw the phosphorescent wake. The torpedo broached and began to porpoise. Then it curved sharply to port. Liebold called out, "Captain, that's a circular run." The Mark 18 electric torpedo was favored because it produced no visible wake, unlike the steam-powered Mark 14, whose white foam trail pointed directly back to the submarine. The Mark 18 ran at 29 knots, carried 570 pounds of Torpex equivalent to 850 pounds of TNT, and was guided by a gyroscope that maintained directional control through rudder adjustments. A circular run occurs when the guidance system fails, either from gyroscope malfunction, seized gimbal bearings, or jammed rudder, and the torpedo continues turning instead of straightening. The Navy had documented 24 to 30 circular runs during the war. 2 proved fatal. USS Tullabee, SS-284, was lost on March 26, 1944, when her Mark 14 torpedo circled back. Now Tang faced the same fate. O'Kane ordered all-ahead emergency, right full rudder, then left full rudder, attempting a fishtail maneuver to swing the stern clear. Chief Electrician's mate James Culp tried desperately to accelerate. The physics were merciless. The torpedo speed was 29 knots. Tang's speed was 6 knots. The closing speed was approximately 33 knots combined. Time available was approximately 20 seconds. A 311-foot submarine cannot accelerate like a sports car. By the time Tang began to respond, the torpedo had already traveled most of its fatal circle, approximately 970 feet in a radius of 150 to 200 feet. At approximately 2:30 plus 20 seconds, the torpedo struck Tang's portside aft in the vicinity of the after torpedo room. The fishtail maneuver had only caused the torpedo to strike farther aft than it would have otherwise, stern instead of amidships. The explosion felt like the world coming to an end. Personnel as far forward as the control room suffered broken limbs. The detonation destroyed approximately 25 feet of pressure hull on the port side. Tang's propulsion plant was destroyed instantly. The after torpedo room, maneuvering room, and after engine room flooded immediately. Tang plunged by the stern, as O'Kane later described, much as you would drop a pendulum suspended in a horizontal position. 9 men were on the bridge when the torpedo struck. Commander Richard O'Kane, Bill Leibold, Floyd Caverly, Lieutenant Junior Grade John Hubeck, Charles Andriolo, the radio man who couldn't swim, Sidney Jones, the chief quartermaster, Darrell Rector, a gunner's mate, James White, another gunner's mate, and 1 additional crewman. As Tang's bow rose, the men were washed overboard or thrown into the sea. O'Kane, Leibold, and Caverly managed to stay afloat. Hubeck and White struck out swimming toward China and were never seen again. Andriolo, who couldn't swim, went down with the bridge. Lieutenant Lawrence Savadkin, in the flooding conning tower, achieved a remarkable feat. He found an air pocket in the periscope stuffing box housing, swam through the flooded compartment, and made a free ascent. The first American wartime escape without a breathing device, bursting to the surface as the bridge deck sank 50 feet below him. Though the stern plunged to the bottom at 180 feet, Tang's bow remained on the surface briefly due to the buoyancy of intact forward compartments. The boat assumed a spar buoy position at approximately 40 degrees. Savadkin saw about 25 feet of bow projecting above the waves before it finally settled. Approximately 30 to 40 men survived the initial explosion and made their way forward. In the control room, sailors secured the compartment, destroyed classified publications by burning them, and then evacuated forward as water rose. When they opened the door to the forward torpedo room, the pressure difference literally blew men through the opening. Conditions deteriorated rapidly. Battery fires broke out in the forward battery compartment, creating acrid smoke. Paint began melting and running down the bulkheads from the heat. Air became increasingly foul. Japanese depth charges dropped overhead, forcing the men to wait. Over half the men showed little familiarity with the Momsen lung escape devices. This would be the only operational use of Momsen lungs for submarine escape in World War II. Mel Enos led a party into the escape trunk on the first attempt but left before properly streaming the escape buoy. He was never seen again. On the second attempt, 3 men left the trunk, but only motor machinist mate Clayton Decker reached the surface alive. Chief of the boat William Ballinger came up too fast, was bleeding, and drowned. On the third attempt, torpedo man Hayes Truckee, with his air supply exhausted, performed a free ascent, the first American wartime free escape from a submerged submarine. On the fourth attempt, 3 men reached the surface using Momsen lungs. On the fifth attempt, 3 men surfaced, but all were in weakened condition, apparently unable to breathe properly. All died, likely from air embolism. By the fourth attempt, conditions in the forward torpedo room had become unbearable. The fire in the forward battery compartment was so intense that paint was melting. The combination of compressed air, heat, foul atmosphere, and CO2 buildup created panic. 13 men left the submarine via the escape trunk. 8 reached the surface, only 5 survived. The remaining approximately 30 men in the forward torpedo room perished from smoke, heat, and carbon dioxide poisoning as the battery fire consumed available oxygen. 9 survivors floated in the Formosa Strait for up to 8 hours on the morning of October 25, 1944. O'Kane, Leibold, Caverly, and Savadkin stayed together, planning to float toward China. The 5 escaped trunk survivors, Decker, Flanagan, De Silva, Truckee, and Narawansky, clung to the escape buoy. Japanese patrol craft P-34, also known as CD-34, appeared that morning, searching for survivors of the ship's Tang had sunk. A whaleboat was sent to pick up the Americans. Pharmacist's mate Paul Doc Larson had surfaced, but was unconscious. When he failed to respond, the Japanese threw him overboard. The survivors of Tang's handiwork, burned and mutilated Japanese sailors, were aboard P-34. They beat and kicked the Tang crewmen. O'Kane later wrote, "When we realized that our clubbings and kickings were being administered by the burned, mutilated survivors of our handiwork, We found we could take it with less prejudice. The Americans were kept on the hot steel deck for 5 days and nights with no food or water. Fair-skinned submariners became a mass of blisters. Japanese survivors stuck lit cigarettes up their noses. 9 men survived from Tang. Commander Richard H. O'Kane was washed off the bridge and swam for 8 hours. Lieutenant Commander Lawrence Savadkin made a free ascent from the flooded conning tower. Henry J. Flanagan escaped using a Momsen lung. BM-1C. William R. Liebold was washed off the bridge and swam for 8 hours. RT-1C. Floyd M. Caverly was also washed off the bridge and swam for 8 hours. MM-2C. Jesse B. De Silva escaped using a Momsen lung. MM-3C. Clayton O. Decker escaped using a Momsen lung and was the first to successfully exit. TM-2C. Hayes O'Truckey made a free ascent after his air supply was exhausted. TM-3. Pete Narawansky escaped using a Momsen lung. The survivors were taken first to Formosa, where they were paraded through Taipei carrying signs, beaten with sticks by civilians, including children. They were then transported to Japan. At Ofuna Naval Interrogation Camp, known as the Torture Farm, a secret facility not registered with the Red Cross, prisoners were held in individual cells with strict silence enforced. Meals consisted of approximately 500 calories per day. Submariners were treated as war criminals for sinking civilian shipping. Fellow prisoners included Louis Zamperini and Gregory Pappy Boyington. At Omori POW camp on Tokyo Bay, conditions were worse than anything we had seen before, according to O'Kane. Clayton Decker's roommate was Pappy Boyington. O'Kane was singled out for the worst treatment as commanding officer. At liberation, he weighed only 88 pounds, down from 172, suffering from beriberi, dysentery, and jaundice. Medical assessment rated his survival odds at 50-50. All 9 Tang survivors endured 10 months of captivity, and all 9 survived to liberation in August 1945. Of 87 men aboard Tang on her 5th patrol, 78 were killed, approximately half instantly in the explosion, the remainder trapped as the submarine sank or during failed escape attempts. Notable among those lost were William Ballinger, the chief of the boat, who heroically led escape attempts but drowned surfacing. Charles Andriolo, a radioman who couldn't swim, went down with the bridge. Reuben McNeil Rayford, a steward, was possibly the youngest American military casualty, having joined the Navy at age 13 by lying about his age. Mel Enos, the diving officer and youngest officer aboard, helped destroy codebooks before leading the first escape attempt. On March 27, 1946, President Harry S. Truman presented Commander Richard O'Kane with the Medal of Honor on the White House lawn for his actions on October the 23rd to 24th, 1944, the attacks preceding the sinking. The citation praised his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. O'Kane received 7 awards of America's 3 highest decorations for valor, 1 Medal of Honor, 3 Navy Crosses, and 3 Silver Stars, along with the Legion of Merit with V device and Purple Heart. USS Tang remains the most successful American submarine of World War II. She sank 33 ships totaling 116,454 tons, 16,000 tons more than second-place USS Flasher. She completed 5 war patrols in only 9 months of combat, averaging 6.6 ships per patrol, or over 8 on offensive patrols. She sank 1 ship every 10 days on average. Her third patrol's 10 ships for 39,100 tons remains the most successful single patrol by any American submarine. O'Kane retired as Rear Admiral in July 1957 and wrote 2 acclaimed books, Clear the Bridge, The War Patrols of the USS Tang in 1977, considered a classic of naval literature, and Wahoo, The Patrols of America's Most Famous Waditu Submarine in 1987. He died on February 16, 1994, and is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. The R. Lee Burke-class destroyer USS O'Kane was named in his honor. The O'Kane Cribbage Board, a tradition dating to his service on Wahoo, passes to the wardroom of the oldest fast-attack submarine in the Pacific Fleet upon each boat's decommissioning. The National Waditu Museum in New Orleans houses Final Mission USS Tang submarine experience, an interactive exhibit where visitors receive cards corresponding to individual crew members and experience the events of October the 24th to 25th, 1944, discovering whether their crewmen survived. Tang's loss came at the peak of American submarine effectiveness. In 1944, approximately 100 fleet boats operating in the Pacific sank 603 Japanese merchant ships totaling 2.7 million tons in 520 war patrols. U.S. submarines, comprising less than 2% of the Navy, accounted for 56% of all Japanese merchantmen sunk and 28% of Japanese warships destroyed. The submarine campaign was decisive. Japanese commodity imports plunged from 16.4 million to 10 million tons. The fuel situation became so critical that before Leyte Gulf, Japanese strategists were uncertain their fleet could even withdraw regardless of battle outcome. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey concluded, the war against shipping was perhaps the most decisive single factor in the collapse of the Japanese economy. But this success came at terrible cost. The submarine service casualty rate of 22% was the highest of any American military branch. Of 263 submarines making war patrols, 52 were lost. Every man who stepped aboard knew the odds. Tang's story embodies both the extraordinary achievements and terrible sacrifices of the silent service. The most successful submarine was destroyed not by the enemy but by her own weapon, a 570-pound Torpex warhead that completed its fatal arc in the time it takes to count to 20.